I bet every block in the city had a half a dozen to a dozen people.
Little monuments were in the corner.
Yeah, remember that?
They were still there during Korean War, I know.
Yeah.
As a little kid, I saw them.
Flagpoles.
Yeah, flagpoles and cement stars, right. and they're painted red, white, and blue, and there's still a few around.
Vic Justino was talking about that one time on a Saturday about the ones that were out and where they were.
Yeah.
There were 16.5 million Americans that served in uniform in World War II, and they've projected that by Christmas of 2013, fewer than 1 million will remain. Fewer than a million will remain alive.
Yeah.
Sure. Out of 16 million that were in the service in World War II.
Yeah, every day they lose 1,000 or something so like
many.
that.
It's mother and father, Mother Nature and Father Time. And then they making levity of that.
Yeah.
I mean, long before Tom Brokaw came out with his book about the greatest generation, I said to my mom, "Wow, what a great generation you had! Look at Depression, World War II.
Yeah.
And then the Cold War after that.
Anything must have seemed great after that,
Yeah. Yeah, and they were struggling. They were struggling. It was a happy, I think I had a very happy childhood. And yet I went through World War II. Was born during the Depression, and somehow maybe the expectations were less. I never thought I'd ever own a house, or my parents never owned an automobile, and so never, the only thing I wanted was to get on the fire department. Once I found out that there was a fire department, but and I did. I was fortunate. But other than that, I was very happy with discovering things, to be part of something. I didn't want to start a revolution or start a new business. I wanted to just be part of what was going on.
So you really, you knew where you stood in World War II, right? You knew you were, or you weren't, right?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
My father, whose first name I bear, John E. Kachoko, he had enlisted in the United States Army in June of '41. He did not wait to be drafted. He was already in the service. He was at Fort Leonard Wood, which I always thought was one word, the way my dad said it. I always thought it was like Leavenworth. It was like Fort Leonard Wood. It was only later when I learned about General Leonard Wood that I found out that this was two words. But everyone that was there always rattled that off as though it was one word, Fort Leonard Wood. Yeah. But he was on leave. He had completed his basic training. He was on leave with my grandparents, his mom and dad, in Kansas. They lived on a farm in Kansas. And he was there on December 7th when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and the orders were immediately given that all soldiers had to return to their base immediately. And I remember my dad always said that the day before Pearl Harbor, the fact that you were in uniform was no big deal. I mean, people were polite to you, of course, but it was no big deal. The day after Pearl Harbor, he couldn't walk down a street without having people saying, "Can I do something for you, soldier?" Cars would pull up, stop. "Are you going somewhere, soldier? Can I give you a lift? Do you need a ride?" He said it was just amazing how everything changed with the attack on. Suddenly people realized how important the Army was going to be.
Yeah.
There was PBS had something a number of years ago, Johnny Carson talking about the World War II years like that. And he said, after this happened, without being declared, the U.S. looked like it was under martial law. Just looked like it. Just had that appearance. Yeah. Everybody was, sitting in squares or whatever, and they were orderly, and the police were out and whatever, and people addressing the crowds. And I can see where that would be.
Yeah.
You see the pictures of soldiers guarding the White House. Soldiers with the old they had the old World War I flat helmets. But there they are with their rifles guarding. In fact, I understand that it was then that the White House was closed off to the public. Prior to that, the White House was open as a public building. It was like a post office. It was a public building. You could drive in. There was, but it was because of World War II that suddenly the commander in chief had to be protected, and it never changed after the war. It never went back to that again.
Yeah.
I know my dad and my older sister was born in 1942. I was born in '46. He said that Sunday, he was down to visit my one aunt. They had four. His family had 4 girls, then 5 boys, born in that order. So the older sisters, and then a couple of 3 kids were down somewhere in Indiana, some town, and they were down. And him and the brother-in-law were listening to the Bears-Cardinals football game on the radio, and they broke in. And as you said, what's Pearl Harbor?
Yeah,
where's Pearl Harbor? What is that?
I've often wondered about that. How many people knew where or what Pearl Harbor was
Right.
before it was attacked. People that didn't, weren't that interested in geography or had never been to Hawaii.
But it was our naval base in the
Sure.
Pacific.
And I'm sure
all those ships were. But who knew that what a battleship was in those days? Nobody was paying attention.
It probably seemed even farther away in people's minds, like it was way out in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Well, it is farther than you think.
Yeah.
Farther than they show in those weather maps, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It was kind of right
Alaska
off the coast
and
of
Hawaii,
California.
the rest of the U.S. But
And how is it going to affect us? That's so far away. It's I don't know, 5,000 miles from California or whatever it is. And yet
If I could do something, if I could just take a moment, because I do this every year. We have, town of Cicero is one of the few communities that has an annual Pearl Harbor observance. We had a man from our town whose name was Joseph Philip Stefan. He did not graduate, but he attended Morton High School, our local high school, and he was in the United States Navy, and he was aboard the battleship Arizona the day of the attack, and he died aboard the Arizona.
Oh.
And we learned about this only really in the 1990s. It was really brought to anyone's attention. It was one of those things that had been kind of forgotten about. So we erected a tablet in his memory. The VFW took the bull by the horns and got a tablet erected. So every year now we have a service commemorating Pearl Harbor Day and particularly remembering our townsmen. And I always do a few words from what I think is the equivalent for the 20th century of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and that's FDR's speech on the following days. If I could just do a couple quick excerpts.
please.
And I always say that the words of FDR sound best when they're done in the voice of FDR. So I will do my impression of our great president. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. And I ask the Congress to declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank
You evidently had to rehearse this a little bit.
He's done this before.
First
Yeah.
impression I ever
Yeah.
really first impression I ever did was that my dad was a great admirer of Franklin Roosevelt. He said he considered him to be the greatest president of our nation in his lifetime.
Yeah.
He always said, I'm not talking in regards to Lincoln or Washington, but he said in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I've always been interested in him, and that speech is just such a dramatic speech. And I've learned that historians do compare it to the Gettysburg Address for the impact and the fact that it's brief, it's to the point, it's powerful.
And the time of it being delivered.
The timing,
Yeah.
That was before Congress, right?
Right.
Or combined.
It was on the 8th. The next day they assembled,
Yeah.
and he delivered that speech to the joint session of the Senate and
My
House.
father was. We always had a framed, colored picture of FDR, and in fact, I have it.
He wasn't colored.
Yeah, he was. The picture was. Maybe he wasn't.
Just kidding, folks.
And
Wait.
he was just. I don't know. You just whether you think he provoked or prolonged the Depression or not, you just had to love him. You just had.
And he was a superb commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
Whatever controversy there is about the New Deal, he was a superb commander-in-chief in World War II. I think you have to give him a great deal of the credit for the success that we achieved in that
That's
war.
right, and he didn't always take the advice of his Joint Chiefs of Staff.
He was the commander.
He was the commander in chief, and some of his appointments, were guys like Nimitz and MacArthur and
Eisenhower.
He put this team together.
Yeah, and
Eisenhower was. They passed over how many guys to put him up there?
Oh God, I have no. They said
Ike was a colonel on December 1st, 1941. He had just been promoted to 1 star. Just been promoted to 1 star, but he was a colonel going into. So that's how far down on the pecking order he was.
Yeah.
And 4 years later, he's a 5-star general of the Army.
Yeah. I know. I was at Fort Lewis, and they said that he was a lieutenant colonel there for a while. This was before the war. And he was General MacArthur's aide for a number of years. And you remember how they both made some comments. MacArthur said, "Oh, Eisenhower, yeah, he was a good office boy."
He said he was the best damn clerk I
ever had. And Eisenhower said to MacArthur, he said, "I had 4 years of theatrics and histrionics or something." And so
they did not see eye to eye.
But
although
nobody ever saw eye to eye with MacArthur.
Ike never undercut. I mean, he was proper when he served with him. He never undercut him. He never criticized him or anything when he was
a perfect officer.
He was not out trying to demean. In later years, they said these things about each other.
Yeah, they're out of the Army or whatever. And for example, I know I can't picture Eisenhower having to be relieved of a command as Harry Truman did with MacArthur. He was going beyond the policy to go in China after him, and that's in Korea, folks. Later, so.
Sure. Yeah. Well, MacArthur. I mean, I think the great failing was what MacArthur should have done. He should have flown. He should have requested an appointment with the president. He should have flown to Washington D.C. and laid out to the president what he thought was wrong.
Yeah.
But MacArthur would not do that. I mean, they were two strong strong men who did not really like each other, and they.
Well, I think MacArthur had probably had gained so much stature in taming Japan, if you will, and that worked very well. There was
military governor later.
And there was no, like in Germany, they were afraid of werewolves and all that. There was no retribution.
No.
The Japanese did not. They weren't sniping. There weren't guerrillas. And so I think he probably thought that he was always right, and Truman, in Washington wasn't.
It's like the star thing again.
Yeah.
The star.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And you would not have had that clash between MacArthur and Roosevelt
because
they understood each other. They both had that they understood, where they were. They both were men that had a sense of themselves, and I think. Because they had differences, FDR and MacArthur had, but they were always able to work them out. MacArthur would have never crossed that line with FDR.
No, he would have never crossed it. I remember being downtown. You remember when MacArthur was relieved that he visited Chicago? And I'll never forget, there was a parking garage company by the name of R.G. Liddy, L-Y-D-E-Y, and they used to have a statue of actually an attendant, and he was like waving you in. You remember that? And he was like that, but it looked like a salute. And they I remember going by there, and they had an American flag in his hand, and MacArthur had a triumphant tour maybe down State Street or Michigan Avenue. I mean, you had to love the guy.
Hero's welcome.
A hero's welcome.
He's one of the greatest soldiers this nation ever produced.
Had, and he spent his whole career in the military. And he was a great strategist. I like Halsey. I like to read. I just finished, our Navy in the two front Navy really by Samuel Morrison. But they said MacArthur, he was planning all the time, and he had good people, and and. He was tough to get along with at times because he was right most of the time, and so
he's one of the few men in American history who was a general in 3 wars. He was brief. He was
Yeah,
breveted,
right.
as they would say. He was a one-star general in the First World
World
War.
War.
He
Yeah.
reverted to lower rank after the war, but then, of course, he's commanding general in World War II, and then again in Korea. So
Yeah.
Winfield Scott is the only other one
Yeah.
I know of who was a general in three
Three
wars.
wars.
The way,
Yeah.
the way
It was portrayed by Sidney Greenstreet in
They
died with their
died
boots
with
on.
their boots on, yeah. And he's
Good
in
casting,
command.
though.
He's in command at Gettysburg 2 years after he had actually been relieved.
No, he was back in the. No, it was pretty accurate, wasn't it?
Well, they had him still in uniform as commanding general at the Battle of Gettysburg. They're
it?
getting the telegraph reports
Oh, I
at
didn't
the
know that was
War
in
Department.
Gettysburg. I thought something-
But the one thing I just want to say about FDR in that speech, the interesting thing about that speech is, you could have expected most leaders to ask God for victory. You would have thought that they would have asked God to grant us victory in this war. And FDR doesn't do that. He says, we will gain
Yeah.
the inevitable triumph, so help us God. He's taking an oath to God.
Yeah.
Because Eisenhower later said the one thing that he thought was the most impressive thing about Roosevelt was he never had the slightest doubt that we would be victorious. It would never even have crossed his mind
No.
that we were not going to be victorious in this
Yeah.
war. So he didn't feel an obligation to ask God for victory. That was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
pledging to God that we are going to win.
Yeah, right.
It seems that attitude permeated the whole country then, really. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
And and another thing is, it's not like we were two nations of, more or less equal beliefs fighting each other. We were fighting some pretty bad, awful, godless people, and
Yeah.
the things that were going on.
On both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, even with our great ally Uncle Joe. I mean, look at that. I mean, I can see why they mollycoddled him and what they did, because he could always flip and go back, join with Adolf again.
And there was serious consideration to
Sure.
that.
Well, they had-
Stalin would have sold out in a Murmansk minute if the opportunity had come. And Hitler speculated about cutting a deal as late as late 44. Hitler was speculating about possibly settling with the
Separate
Soviets.
peace.
Yeah.
Well, they had signed it.
Because they had been
back
allies
in
for 2
40.
years. They were allies at the beginning of the war.
But you know what? I think that surprise attack, Germany against Russia was the same as Japan against us in Pearl, at Pearl Harbor, and no one would ever have accepted. I don't think.
Thank the Lord he did it in September and not March, because he had the winter to go through then. And that, after
Yeah.
He wasted in the Balkans. That was one of the things. He wasted those early months of 41 in the Balkans. Taking care of that, pulling Italy's chestnuts out of the fire in Greece, because Italy had invaded Greece and had bogged down. So that's why his offensive against Russia was delayed. He just doesn't go in there until June.
And he wouldn't give them winter equipment or something. Or
No,
winter clothing.
he thought
No, they didn't think
they
it was-
didn't need
no,
it.
it was gonna be
Yeah.
over with.
It would be over with.
He thought Russia was just going to collapse, and at the beginning they did.
Yeah.
I mean, at the beginning,
Oh, sure.
the Russian military performed horribly at
And
the beginning of
the
the war.
populace was glad to see somebody come in, but then they started messing over the populace. Mass executions.
right.
whatever
And then
else,
They
they
were
really-
welcomed
yeah.
into Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine
Yeah.
was they were glad to be rid of Stalin and the Bolsheviks.
Well, he only starved out 7 million of them in the 30s.
Yeah, right.
The farmers,
Yeah.
the kulaks, while they're selling the grain.
Selling the grain, to get money.
And who was his big deputy there? Nikita.
Yeah.
Khrushchev
was in
in
there.
the Ukraine, yeah. He was,
Now, is
that
your
was-
name
that was- that was-
Polish?
No.
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 What is it?
Yeah.
White Russian. What they call Belarus or Belarus.
Belarus, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Now I know in Poland they referred to World War II as the war they lost twice.
Because they were
To the
invaded.
Germans?
Yeah,
The Russians.
and into the Russians, yeah.
And then
And how they've survived. Unbelievable.
they're stabbed in the back by the Russians. The Russians wind up getting a huge chunk of Polish territory because they had negotiated this deal with the
Right.
with the
And-
Germans.
And 1 out of 4 people in Poland died in World War II. 1 out
Wow.
of 4.
Wow.
Total, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Look
The
at
joke, I heard the joke they said in Poland was if Poland is invaded simultaneously by Germany and Russia, who do you shoot first? And the answer was, you shoot the Germans first, business before pleasure.
Wow.
I like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but then that goes to show you. We'll hear people like today. They'll say about, well, all those arms went to Saddam Hussein from Uzbek. Well, yeah. Well, that's like saying, gee, look, we were allies with Joe Stalin. What do we give them? All kinds
Yeah.
of weaponry and
Yeah.
aid and.
Which they don't really acknowledge to this day,
No.
but all the
They would
things like trucks and
They would have been knocked out. If
They-
it hadn't been for American aid, they would have been
they
knocked
would
out
have
of the
knocked
war.
They had
out,
one
you
big
know.
thing going for them: the manpower. They had tremendous amount
tremendous,
of people to sacrifice.
Yeah.
They were using American walkie-talkies to communicate. They were firing American ammunition. Their troops were being carried in American trucks with
Right.
American tires. They were eating American rations that had
Yeah.
provided to them.
Yeah.
They even had American aircraft that were provided to
Yeah.
them for the war.
That Bell P-39,
Yeah.
which had a 37 millimeter cannon firing through the, they loved it because it knocked out the German tanks,
I remember our modern European history, and I think it was over at the Wilson branch of the colleges. Now Kennedy King.
Yeah.
The Russian army in the First World War, the first two waves would have weapons that would go out of the trenches. The third one wouldn't. They were to look for the weapons
They
on the
picked up-
fallen.
Yeah,
Those were already down, knowing that there was going to be a.
yeah.
So
That happened in Korea because while I was drafted during the war, I didn't go over there because they signed the armistice when I was in basic. They knew I was coming, the Chicagoans were
that was
coming.
it. Yeah.
That was it. But they said that as they call them, the gooks, the third wave,
Yeah.
they were picking up
Yeah.
the weapons from the first two, and you would just be inundated, by the onrushing, and it was no surprise they were banging drums and
Yeah.
blowing sirens and it was
Trumpets and that stuff.
yeah, it was trumpets, yeah.
I've seen that
psychology.
recreated. I think it was Pork Chop Hill, that movie.
Korea,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Good,
Yeah.
good picture. By the way,
Yeah.
with Gregory Peck and
Right.
Yeah.
Very
Abel
good film.
Fernandez is in. I know.
Very good film. How they're kind of running out the clock because the negotiation is going on at Panmunjom.
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And here's this meaningless. Hey, how you doing? We have a visitor.
We have a visitor.
Secret guest
Secret
star,
agent
Challenger.
man. Yeah.
And we're let's see, where are we? Well, we're about 25 minutes to go. Are we time for another break yet, John? Is there commercials coming up, or?
Yeah, you want to go for a break?
Well, why don't we have a commercial now?
Okay, stand by. We will do that right now.
Steve Allen used to.
And you're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians, live and direct from the John DeVita Recording Studios or Broadcast Center on the northwest side of Chicago. And, of course, today is Monday, November the 21st. Hey, friends, how's your appetite, huh? Are you hungry? Well, I tell you what, why don't you get in your car and take a ride over to Sorrento's Italian Village, which is located at 2318 North Manheim Road in Melrose Park. Sam and Frank will be more than happy to seat you at a table, and you can enjoy some great, delicious Italian food. Oh, boy, I have been there many, many times, and their food is just out of this world. At Sorrento's Italian Village, which is located at 2318 North Manheim Road in Melrose Park. Their telephone number is 847-455-9440. They are on Manheim Road. They are south of Grand Avenue about a mile, or south of Fullerton Avenue by about a block. They're on the west side of the street, and they have got one huge parking lot. So stop in. Now, if you want to have a Christmas party or any kind of gatherings, baptism, graduation, any kind of a banquet, give Sam or Frank a call at area code 847-455-9440 or stop in. Now, they have a luncheon special every day, Monday through Friday from about 11 o'clock until about 2 o'clock, and they have a luncheon special, and they have got some great food. That's Sorrento's Italian Village Restaurant. Once again, they are located at 2318 North Manheim Road in Melrose Park. Telephone number is area code 847-455-9440. Again, Sorrento's Italian Village, 2318 North Mannheim Road. They are on the west side of Mannheim Road, just about a block or a block and a half south of Fullerton Avenue, and Fullerton Avenue is 2400, or south of Grand and Mannheim, which is about a mile away. Sorrento's Italian Village Restaurant, 2318 North Mannheim Road in Melrose Park. Stop in and have a great, great meal.